Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So this is going to be a session in which we look at some of the music that we've been working on that I've given people to work on as exercises, and some of the results that people have come from it have obtained, and hopefully I have worked out some audio issues. If you could look at the mass of cords going every which way here. I got a new device to handle something else and new routing, and it's a more complicated setup than I've ever had, but it's simpler in that I don't have to change it out every time I switch between doing a live broadcast and doing a recording. So let's jump into some of the things that I want to be talking about today. So, yeah, I mentioned I want to look at some of your music, and that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with a piece that John Foster has done, just doing the exercise that I assigned for this week's musicianship project. So the idea is to get practice on thirds and sevenths. So this is his version of that, and I'm just going to go ahead and play this, and we'll see how this is actually working. So the assignment here, for people who haven't checked out the project, is to write it out, or actually to play it with the root in the left hand, thirds and sevenths of the chord in the right, and to try to connect those thirds and sevenths well. All right? So that's the idea here. And when I gave this project, created this project, the idea was that this is something a jazz pianist needs to be able to do on the fly. Now, if you're not a pianist, that's probably not very reasonable, but still, you want the practice writing out the chords. So I'm going to write what I actually see on the page. When I do a quick scan of things here, I think there is one and perhaps only one error. And I'm going to try to play what's written and not fix the error. And then your task is going to be to tell me where the error is. So I'm just going to play the chords as I see them. I'm going to, basically ignoring the melody, going to read the root and the top chords here. So. Then he would finish with a final C chord. All right, so great job, John. You did, really good job of getting the thirds and sevenths in there, figuring out the ways of connecting them, because sometimes it's going to mean putting the third on top, sometimes it's going to mean getting the seventh on top. And you did a good job, a really good job of that. There's one place that I'll talk about where maybe I would have done something a little different, but it's one of these ones where you have leeway. So the question is, did anyone hear the one chord there? I played what was written here, but the one chord that didn't match the actual chord symbol. Did anyone catch where that was? I'll give you a hint. It's on the second page. There's one chord on the second page where there is one wrong note. And the thing is, it's possible, I don't know if you're here, John, but it's possible you actually meant it correctly, and there's a typo in it, perhaps. But it's this C7 chord here. it should have, because it doesn't say major 7 like all the other C major 7s, right? There's C major 7s all over the place, and they have a B natural, because major 7 means don't flat the 7th. But if you don't see the major, when you just see C7, you got to flat that 7th. So this guy needs to be a B flat. So it should be this G minor 7 to C7 to F major 7. That's the only issue in here. Now, as a notational thing, I get lazy about this myself when I'm just doing exercises, but I try to, if I think anyone else is ever going to see it, I do try to be cognizant of the need for courtesy accidentals. And so, like, if you look at this measure here, going from D minor 7 with a major 7 to plain D minor 7, so the C sharp becomes C natural, this is an opportunity to add what's called a courtesy accidental. You definitely want to put a natural sign on that C. Yes, the bar line technically cancels that C sharp, but you don't want to ever rely on people recognizing that. Anytime you have an accidental in one measure and then that same note appearing in the next measure, be clear about it. Add what's called a courtesy accidental. Put a natural sign on that C, even though it's not strictly necessary, because it makes a huge, huge difference in the number of errors that are made reading it. It's especially true if it's like not just whole notes, but imagine it was like a whole stream of 16th notes, and then suddenly there's a bar line, and now the 16th notes become natural as opposed to sharp. It's just not the kind of thing that the brain is going to process quickly when sight reading. So, great job here. Now, when I said that there's a place where there's an option, let me walk through some of the things here, some of the stuff that's going on. The very first chord he has the third on the bottom, 7th on the top, right? The next chord he has, the D minor 7, also has the third on the bottom, 7th on the top. And then the next chord, C major 7, again, third on bottom, 7th on top. And so you might be thinking, oh, the third can always go on the bottom. But no, the next chord, the G7 chord, in order to connect smoothly, needs to have the third on top, the 7th on the bottom. Anytime the chords basically follow the circle of fifths, you're going to expect those thirds and 7ths to reverse themselves like that. So third on bottom here, 7th on bottom here, and they connect nice and smoothly. You get to take advantage of that common tone. Everything else moves by step. So now we come back to the C major 7, and everywhere else in the piece, the chords either follow the circle of fifths or they move by step. So like going from C to D is moving by step. From D back down to C is moving by step. From C to G, circle of fifths. From G to C, also circle of fifths. Whenever the root moves by third, you're going to have a choice. You can either move down, so like he has gone from third on the bottom and 7th on top to 7th on the bottom and third on top. So he's basically taken that voicing and moved it down. The other alternative would have been to do it here, right? To move the voicing up. And the observation I made during the lesson is that usually, when in doubt, when you have an opportunity to move up, take it. And the reason for this is really, really easy to state and see in this particular piece. Look what has just happened. We started with our C here, and we ended the piece here. If we were then going to take the repeat back to C, I'd want to be here, right? Because that's what connects smoothly from the G7. And the only reason, so what's happened is the whole thing has kind of settled downward as we moved. And this is the place where it happened. It happened right here. If it hadn't been for that, everything else would have worked out kind of perfectly here. But this is the one place where the shift happens. And you can kind of see that it's happened because we're starting with everything above middle C. And right after that shift, now we've got notes below middle C there. So if it had gone up here, then we wouldn't have settled down as low as we ended up. Now, it's not a problem where we ended up, and sometimes you want to shift registers, but this is just an example of that principle that I discussed in the lesson, which is when in doubt, when you have a choice of moving either way, and that happens when the chords move by thirds. When you have that choice, usually it's going to be better to go up, because in general, the way the circle of fifths works is it's going to start pulling chords down again. Now, the one place it could have been worse, but John made a specific choice here to go from the C major here, C major 7, to F major 7 here, rather than staying here. If he had stayed here, then it would have been even lower. Right? And so he has made a choice here to jump up. And so even though this wasn't necessary, I think it was a brilliant idea. So John, I'm highly in favor of this jump here. And let me tell you why. This C major 7 here, yes, it's got the third on top. And had we switched to 7th on top, it would have been better voice leading. But yeah, you would have ended up too low. So sometimes you have to make jumps because the circle of fifths is just pulling things downward, and if the whole chord progression is following the circle of fifths, you don't get a lot of choices in the matter. And you've already made some choices here, like jumping from here on the F major to jumping up here to the A minor, which is absolutely the right choice. But had you not made that choice to jump up for the F, everything would have ended up even lower. And the reason why this is an especially brilliant place to make that jump, you want to take advantage of the opportunities, like here with a chord between the F and the A minor, where the chord is moving by third anyhow. But this piece doesn't give you a lot of those opportunities. Those are the only two places in the entire song where the chord moves by third. This measure going from C to E minor is a chord moving by third, and then here going from F major to A minor. That's the only two places in the whole song where the chord moves by third. So this is still circle of fifths here, but it's kind of like a comma. What do I mean by that? If you think about like A minor 7 going to D7, those two really go together. That A minor 7 really wants to go to D7. Any chord that has a note that's a minor seventh above the root, so this applies to minor sevenths, it also applies to dominant seventh chords, like the G7, this interval here, from the root to the seventh, is a minor seventh. Anytime you have that interval, that resolution from G7 to C is really strong, and you don't want to interrupt the voice leading in the middle of that. You don't want to interrupt the voice leading when two chords are really tightly interlocked. The place where you want to interrupt, where if you're going to have to break good voice leading, the place to do it is with two chords that don't really have much to do with each other anyhow. And this is the spot where that happens. I sometimes refer to this F major 7 chord here. This is the major 4 chord. I refer to that as sort of an inert gas. I'm thinking back to chemistry. An inert gas is a chemical element that doesn't react with other elements. This 4 chord here is what I refer to as an inert gas. So when I'm going, I didn't need that chord. This chord progression would have worked just fine if it had just been C major 7. So right? It would have been totally fine without the F. The F that didn't need to be there. In fact, it's not there in the original sheet music. Almost all the other chords I have here are taken directly from the published sheet music. I made a couple of small modifications here and there to make it work better for this exercise or to feel a little more like how a jazz musician might actually play it. But I basically just went with the original sheet music chords. This is the one extra chord that I added here. And I did it because 2 whole measures of just sitting on that C major 7 was kind of boring. And so this particular idiom here, 2 measures of 1, and then a measure of 3, and then a measure of 6, that's a very common thing. 2 measures of 1, and then a measure of 3, and then a measure of 6, and then eventually going to 2. That idiom is pretty common. It's a way of getting from the 1 chord to the 2 chord, and taking 4 bars to do it. But this idea of just plugging in a 4 chord so you don't have to sit on that 1 chord for 2 bars, it often works, if it works at all with the melody, and it usually will. I mean, this G here isn't in the F chord, but it's beautiful. It's a 9th. It sounds lovely. So that major 7th chord with the 9th in the melody is a lovely sound. So that 4 chord we often insert in exactly that situation, a chord progression that really originally was 2 bars of 1, then 3, and then 6 to lead to 2. In that situation, we very often plug in a 4 chord. So at this point, I want to make another observation here about this piece and about this whole process here. Everything that I'm really talking about here in terms of how the chords work, the circle of fifths, this inert gas chord, and the idiom of getting from 1 to 2 and taking 4 bars to do it, this is what the Harmony and Chord Progressions course is about. So if you've ever been curious about the course that I offer called Harmony and Chord Progressions, learning how to build chord progressions like this is a huge, well, that is what the course is about. It's about how to build chord progressions like this, and then also how to then add additional chords, make more reharmonizations to make it, more fancy. So things like how to add that 4 chord, where you can add that 4 chord in there. So anyhow, that the fact that there's no real relationship between this C chord and then that F chord is just there to fill some space, that's exactly where you can kind of get away with breaking the voice leading and doing that jump up so that we don't end up too low. And yeah, there's not a lot of other good opportunities for it, so that was a great one. So John, I have no idea if you had any conscious thought about doing that, if you were thinking, oh, I need to jump up somewhere, and I guess I'll do it here. But whatever your instinct was that led you to do that was a good instinct, is what I'm saying here. So I'm seeing no comments in chat. So either everyone already knows all about this, or I'm way over everyone's head, or you're just fascinated and don't have questions. You're soaking it all up. But I'd love to see some commentary here. Someone say something here. Give me a question to answer, an observation to respond to. Meanwhile, while you get to your keyboards and try to type something for me to see, I want to revisit the whole piece now and talk a little bit more about the context here. So like these thirds and sevenths I've observed before are really important. This is how we build this is how we're going to build more complex voicings. And starting with a third and seventh is super powerful. And so what I want to do now is just take that same exact thing, but I'm going to add more notes. So I'm going to take exactly what we see here. All right, so I'm singing while playing that. Now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm just going to add one more note. Just going to add one more note. I added one more note to every chord. I had to think about which note I was, and doing that while singing, maybe a little more than I should have done. So let me try it without the singing. I want to play his same voicing here. That's basically what a jazz pianist would play. It's taking exactly this foundation and adding just one more note. So, and yeah, we can add one more note. We can also add two more notes. So, taking this structure and just adding some color to it is adding some color to this is really what jazz piano playing is about. And so it's about first getting that foundation of really knowing your thirds and sevenths. And that's not just for jazz, right? That's any style of music. You're going to want to really be aware of where your thirds and sevenths are, because that's how you're going to spell chords. But in jazz, the idea of adding the color tones is the big thing. And John, yeah, so I'm glad you've been working through that course. And I'm actually curious then, as you're working through the course, if you're like conscious of what's going on here, the techniques, and seeing how it relates to the things in the course. So Steinar is talking about ninths and 13ths. Yeah, those are the notes that I added. I added to this first chord, I added a ninth. The C major 7 had a third and a 7. I added a ninth. And then the same on the next chord, D minor 7, third and 7th. I added a ninth. And then C major 7, added a ninth. G7, the third and 7th. This time I added the 13th. There's particular kind of hand shapes and also kind of sonic shapes having to do with like where the third and 7th are within the voicing and where the color tones are and which ones are on top and which are on the bottom. And there's different arrangements of these notes you'll learn about in doing jazz piano. But that basic shape, third and 7th on the bottom, color tone on top, super, super powerful. I'm going to tell you two stories here. New Age music, I mean, that's sort of first of all, that term is almost never used anymore, in my experience. People have like figured out other terms they could use to subdivide from there. But a lot of New Age music doesn't rely as much on the ninths and 13ths or 6ths as jazz does. That's one of the things that sort of caused there to be a backlash against New Age music, because it kind of grew out of a jazz tradition. There's a lot of crossover, but people would say, oh, you're dumbing it down, removing these color tones. And the thing is, well, it's not dumber. I mean, there's nothing, that's like saying Bach is dumb for not including as many color tones. But in any case, stylistically, generally speaking, New Age music doesn't push the color tones as much. But I want to tell you two little stories, and I already forgot what one of them is. So I'm going to tell you the second story first, and then if I can come back to the first, let me think. Can I remember what the first one was? I don't even remember the other one. So I want to tell you the other story about that F thing. I want to tell you a story about how I learned that F chord trick. This is, and some of you have heard this story. I probably tell it somewhere in the middle of the of the harmony course. But I was at a concert once, and there's the pianist there was a guy named Eric Gunnison, and I think it was Eric Gunnison. The trumpet player Ron Miles was the leader of the group, and the bassist on the concert was Paul Warburton. And now I'm like wondering, was it really Ron on that thing? Anyhow, Paul Warburton was the bass player. I know that much. Paul Warburton's a great bass player. Used to play with Bill Evans, briefly while for a period while Bill Evans was on tour, Paul was a great bass player, and he had very particular ways he had learned about harmonizing pieces that were deep but automatic for him. And one of the things that became aware of hearing him in this concert, I had played with him before, played with him since, talked to him a lot, but this really made an impression on me. They were playing a whole bunch of songs that I was familiar with. They were doing jazz standards, and there were a whole lot of passages like that where the song as I knew it, as the fake book had it, was just, oh, the one chord for 2 bars, and then a 3, and then a 6. And every time that happened, every time there was a passage that I knew the song is just 2 bars of the one chord, and then 2 bars of the one chord, and then 3, 6 to 2. Every time that happened, Paul would put in a 4 chord, and I would hear it. I mean, I would just hear dum 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 dum, and he just had a very particular way of playing these chords very deliberately, and you could just hear his bass line really clearly. Boom, 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 boom. And I would hear that bass line over and over again. Boom, 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 boom. That 1, 4, 3, 6 bass line. And I would hear it in songs where I knew that wasn't how I learned the song. Either I learned it without the 4 chord, or maybe I learned it just differently. Like, say, this little passage right here. Here, it's taking 2 bars to get from the 1 chord to the 2 chord. And Paul would also throw in 1, 4, 3, 6 there, rather than doing this whole thing with the diminished chord. He would take that thing and compress it, And just, this was one of the biggest light bulb moments in my musical life, was realizing, wow, that 1, 4, 3, 6 thing, it's not like I'd never heard it before, but realizing it was a thing you could plug in to other chord progressions that maybe weren't originally written that way. And this opened up just so much for me, realizing, wow, substitutions aren't about one chord replacing another chord necessarily. It could be about a whole chord progression, swapping out another whole chord progression. And yeah, it was life-changing for me. I would not have been able to create anything like that harmony and chord progressions course without things like that revelation. So anyhow, that's that story there. All right, so let me let's see here. I want to see some other comments in here. Yes, this piece is in C major. So yeah, the piece is in C major. I do have, if you're looking at it on screen, you can see the sheet music. But if you're not seeing it on screen, then not. Revisiting the courtesy accidental. Bracket around. So, oh yeah, so this is a thing. Back in like the 17 and 1800s, accidentals themselves were relatively rare. And so editors would put parentheses around these courtesy accidentals to sort of remind you that, hey, this isn't a regular accidental. It's just a courtesy one. Somewhere around 1850, as music started getting more chromatic, more harmonically complex, Chopin and people like this, the density of the accidentals sort of made putting parentheses around them just not feasible. It made the score look too cluttered. So somewhere in the 1800s, editors basically stopped putting parentheses around courtesy accidentals. Basically, there's almost no publishers right now who still use who use parentheses around courtesy accidentals. But if you're reading music that was published more than, say, 150 years ago, then you might well see parentheses around your courtesy accidentals. You should know that studies have been done about this sort of stuff, and density of notes on the page, density of ink on the page is an important factor in readability. So putting parentheses around them unnecessarily will reduce the readability on average. Like, it's statistically proven that an overly dense score will result in more reading errors. So that the things that we can do to reduce the density of the ink on paper, like dispensing with parentheses on courtesy accidentals, spelling accidentals properly so that we don't need as many of them in the first place, All sorts of things like that have been, statistically proven to result in better reading. But it is the case that, again, back in the day when accidentals were less common than they are in modern music, then editors did put parentheses around them. So, let's see. An app. Okay, so actually, Ariana, yeah, I'm going to show you this thing. And I'm just going to put it up here because it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of apps that do what you're talking about there of basically providing playback and showing you chord symbols and then letting you transpose them and things like that. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to search for that song. Best Things. Is it in here? Best Things in Life Are Free. Here we go. This is what it looks like. Now, I'm going to press play. Oops. This is only the bass. So let me turn on the mixer, put on the piano. So this particular app is called iReal Pro, like the letter I, the word real, and then the word pro. It comes from the fact that, so fake books are the general term for this type of thing, not with all the notes written down, not with all the whole notes here, but when you just have the lead sheet. In other words, when you just have what I started with in the exercise, just the lead sheet here. So this is called a lead sheet when you have melody and chord symbols, possibly lyrics. A collection of lead sheets is called a fake book. The real book is the most popular fake book in the jazz world. So iReal Pro was it was originally called iReal Book, and then they kind of got sued or it got threatened anyhow and decided to change it to iReal Pro instead of iReal Book. So that's the app there, and there's a bunch of other apps that do that sort of thing. And what's really cool about them is you can actually read this on, like, my phone is not a big phone. You can kind of tell that from my hand size. But if I put this on the stand, I can read the chords. And if a saxophone player wants to do a song and I don't know the chords, then I can pull this out. Or if a vocalist wants to do the song and I'm like, yeah, I know that song in C, and they say, yeah, but I need to do it in A flat, I can just click where it says C and then change to A flat, and now it's in A flat. And now it'll play it for me in A flat. It'll also change style if I want to hear it as a bossa nova, if I want to hear it at a different tempo, can do all that too. So lead sheets sometimes don't have chords. No, if it doesn't have chords, it's not a lead sheet, I guess. I mean, it's not a lead sheet that anyone would recognize as a lead sheet, unless the song itself is completely atonal. There is music out there that's completely atonal, that's not designed to have chords. And so if you're writing a lead sheet for a piece for which there is no harmonic accompaniment intended, then you wouldn't put chord symbols in there. But your basic lead sheet for your basic kind of song is melody and chords, and then maybe lyrics. The lyrics will be in, like this. The fake book, the real book, did not have lyrics. Even songs that are known to have lyrics, it just didn't have them. And then there was a separate real vocal book that added it. All right, Larry, I'm glad you asked about this chord. And I'm very glad you asked about this chord because this is a change that I made very deliberately to simplify things. And now we get to talk about it a little more. So what I'm showing here is D minor 7 with a G in the bass. Right? This chord is not really a D minor 7 chord. Functionally speaking, it's a G chord. G is actually the root of this chord. This is the 5th of the chord. This is the 7th of the G chord. This is the 9th. This is a 4th. This is basically G9 sus4 is what this is. So it's G. Instead of a 3rd, there's a 4th. then there's a fifth, and then there's a seventh, and then there's a ninth. This is G9 sus4. But this whole lesson's about thirds and sevenths, right? And I didn't want to complicate things by talking about sus4. But that's absolutely the case. That is a valid type of chord, the sus4 chord. And we talked about this some in office hours like a week ago. And it basically means the third of the chord has been replaced by a fourth, right? So that is the meaning of it. It comes from classical suspension, which is something you learn about in the harmony course. You learn more about in my counterpoint course, if you know the whole idea of a suspension. But one of the sounds of a suspension is basically one note in a harmonic context, in whether it's a chord or a counterpoint situation, that doesn't belong to that chord, but it's kind of left over from a previous chord. And then it's kind of left over there. That sound of a leftover note that's not in the chord but kind of sounds cool is called a suspension. So this chord is basically G9 sus4. And yes, I could have said that, and if you see G9 sus4, then this whole business of thirds and sevenths, just play the fourth instead of the third. I didn't feel like getting into that for the lesson, so I'm getting into it now. But this chord here, this way of writing it as D minor 7 / G is actually pretty common. You'll see this a lot in music, especially written for school bands, because the assumption is, well, maybe a student doesn't know what G7 or G9 sus4 is. That's a little too complicated. But if you write it as D minor 7 / G, they might be able to figure it out better. I think that's not a good assumption, because frankly, this notation is going to confuse at least as many people as G9 sus4. But in any case, it's like one of these sort of religious things. Some people love to see that chord written with a slash chord like that. Some people love the sus4 aspect of it. But the reason I wrote it this way is so that I could continue to talk about thirds and sevenths. And the reason why I didn't just call it G7 is the melody is the C. So if I had played, let me go back to my other window here. If I had played I'm singing a C and playing a B, and it's kind of dissonant. Is it so dissonant that you absolutely could not possibly play G7 there? No, it's not. People, you can get away with that. The C doesn't happen until the middle of the measure. Can totally get away with it. But making when that note C, the fourth of the chord, is in the melody, we will very often turn it. We will basically call it a sus chord. That's the term for it, a sus chord, so that we don't have to worry about that dissonance, or worse, this dissonance. That's considered the worst dissonance there is by both in classical and in jazz. This is like the dissonance that we usually try to avoid most of the time. So yeah, and as far as the chord playback in MuseScore, yeah, it's very, very simplistic. It just plays whole notes, or plays the chord for the length of time written, and it does have choice over the like right now. Check this out. If I play this thing here, let me hit play on this for you. It's only playing the roots. And I did that because in the lesson, I wanted to be able to play my thirds and sevenths here. That's because I have selected in properties the root-only voicing. But there's a whole lot of other ones. There's drop 2 voicings, for instance, which is a good jazz voicing. Oh, I only did it for that one chord, so I need to hit the Set as Style button. Now it'll play it for all. So it just has to do with how it's rearranging the notes, basically, how it's which note is on top, which is in the middle, what octave they're in, etc. So there's a whole lot of different settings there. But the thing is, the voicing is only part of it. Really, it's the rhythm that you play it in. That's what really differentiates jazz from other styles, or other styles from each other, is the rhythms. And all of these are just playing with just plain whole notes. So, no matter what we did with the voicing, it's never going to sound really like jazz because it's only whole notes. So, let's see, if I arrange a classical piece for orchestra and I have lead sheet's part playing the soloist line. I guess I don't know what you mean by lead sheet's part playing the soloist line. But if you're talking about arranging for orchestra, we're not talking about a lead sheet. The whole purpose of a lead sheet is you're going to give it to someone to say, make up your own accompaniment from this, and or make up your own improvisation based on this. And that's not going to happen when arranging a classical piece for orchestra. The whole point of this. So let me take this piece now, and just for grins, I'm going to play this a little bit like real. I need to see the rest of it. I'm just guessing what the melody was there. So I made up every note that I just played that isn't that melody, right? Everything about how I played the accompaniment, I just created on the fly. That's what lead sheets are for, to allow you to create your own part based on, without having to write it all out, and to allow individual creativity in it. Or if you're, say, a saxophonist and you're not going to play chords, you might be playing an improvised solo. You want to know the chords so you can improvise over that chord progression. So that, what I was just doing in my right hand, is what an instrumentalist who's not playing chords might do with those chords. So lead sheets serve those two functions, allowing a pianist to, or a guitar player to play the chords somehow without having to have all the notes written out and lock them into a straitjacket, or to allow a saxophonist or someone like that to improvise on the thing. So yeah, I guess if you did write, if you were trying to write a pops piece where you're letting the soloist like a concerto, say a jazz concerto, where a saxophonist is up in front of the orchestra's got the background. Well, the orchestra's not going to be playing from a lead sheet. You're have to write out all the parts normal, but you still might give a lead sheet to the soloist, and yeah, you absolutely want to give them chord symbols so they know how to improvise over the thing. I mean, they might already know the chords, but no, you would absolutely put the chord. If you want that soloist to improvise, you're going to give them chords. So, yeah, and improvising over something where there's not chords, but you just give a scale is common too. And yeah, that is absolutely a thing where in certain types of, like starting around 1960 or so, that became a common thing to say, hey, maybe we don't need all these chords changing every measure like that. Let's just hang out on one scale for a while. That's a piece by Miles Davis called Kinda Blue. And basically the improvisation on that is all just based on D minor or D Dorian. I say that was all based on D Dorian, and if you were looking at the screen, you could tell that because my finger never touched a black key, right? It was just the white keys, D Dorian. And yeah, I was playing all sorts of interesting clustery sounds here in my left hand to give you the illusion of a chord progression, but there was no specific chord progression. It was really just noodle. It was improvising based on D Dorian and creating my own sense of tension and release within it. So that's a big part of the jazz tradition also, where you don't write out chord symbols necessarily, you just say what scale to be in. But then rather than write the name of the scale, often we do just write D minor 7, and a jazz musician will know if they see 16 bars of D minor 7, it means have fun with D Dorian is what it means. It doesn't mean keep arpeggiating a D minor 7 chord. That won't be the right sound at all. It means use the D Dorian scale and create your own tension and release dynamic within that. That's sort of the secret code of jazz. You know, you have to know which chords mean which scales, and there's a whole lot of stuff to learn. So, in any case, that is this piece, and so definitely, if you haven't checked out the lesson already, and if you're not already in the musicianship workshop, if you're not already like a gold level member to be participating in that, you know, this is the kind of thing we do. So that's, you know, I give you assignments, give you projects to work on, and you know, then I can give feedback on them and so forth, and that's often what we will be using this music masterclass for, is projects on that, or you know, feedback on things that are done in the context of that workshop. And we did a lot of that over the last, you know, the course of last year after I introduced that workshop. So what I want to do next is, in the time that's left here, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and take a look at another piece. And can I remember which one I was going to look at? Yeah, I'm going to look at Patrick's piano arrangement because it's really nice. And this was done for the harmony course, if I'm not mistaken. Did I not just say I wanted to go there? Did you all see me click that I wanted to go to that? Come on, go. Go. Huh. Oh, finally going. Okay. So this is an assignment that was done as part of, I believe, now I'm doubting myself. I think it's the harmony course. The thing is, yeah, it's the harmony course. There's certain basic things that are common between the harmony course and the counterpoint course. Certain basics about understanding of triadic harmony and things like that. That it's really the same concepts that you need to learn either way. And so I just want to take a look at Patrick's arrangement of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And we'll talk about this because there were some nice things that he did, really nice things that he did. Yeah, I think it's going to be easiest just for me to leave it here on screen as is here. Yeah, I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to play it. I wrote this part. All right, so I wrote that much of the arrangement and talked about the choices I made. And then I asked people to complete this in the same style using the techniques that I talk about in the course. And so here's what he has. Oops. So the thing, I mean, I created this course 2 years ago. I don't even know how long ago it was, and a lot of people have completed this assignment. And I think Patrick has done an unusually good job of making it seem like one person wrote the whole thing. I mean, really, if I didn't know that I didn't write all of that arrangement, I wouldn't have been able to tell where my arrangement finished and where Patrick's part started. He, I think, really did a great job of capturing the specific things that I was talking about. And I talked about all sorts of things about how we might want to establish a pattern, right? This is called an Alberti bass pattern. Right, that kind of pattern, ding, 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 like boom, 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 ding, 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 low, high, mid, high, low, high, mid, high. That pattern is sometimes referred to as an Alberti bass pattern. You're really familiar with it probably from things like this. Right, things, basically Haydn, Mozart, early classical composers loved that pattern. Beethoven too, although eventually, he sort of got tired of it. And composers after that probably didn't use it as much, but you still see it some in more modern music. But it was very of that particular era, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about how that pattern worked and how you might vary it. And so, like the variations that I did, like in the middle of this measure, going mid, high, low instead of high, mid, low, because I could have done that. I could have gone. I could have done that, but I wanted to break up the pattern, and I talk about that and the way the next measure is. It's a little more linear in that, and that's more perhaps earlier, but that's more Bach-like. This idea of arpeggiating chords is one of the things that feels more classical as opposed to Baroque. This idea feels more contrapuntal, and so the delicate balance between how much of this feels chordal and how much of it is contrapuntal, I think Patrick just did a marvelous job of chordal, and then that's all chordal, and then still chordal, and then chordal, and then right, that little walking bass line down there. I mean, I'm a jazz guy. I gotta love a walking bass line. Boom, 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 boom. I totally would have dug that as a jazz thing, but he just, that's just a linear part. It's counterpoint, right? And then he's back to and he's got this going here, which is not the same as I wrote. It's the same as what my original, but taken down an octave, which gives it an extra fullness to say, hey, we're doing something different. It's fine to start a piece light like this, but then there's a general arc we expect to have happen in a piece, an overall sonic arc. And not all pieces follow the same arc, but a pretty common one is to start small, gradually get bigger, hit a climax 2/3 of the way through, or more than 2/3. Some people talk about the golden mean and the specific point at which that climax happens. I think anyone who talks about that is probably not looking at actual music, because I think normally the actual music is more than the golden mean, more than 2/3 of the way through. The climax of most pieces is closer to the end than that, is my feeling. So anyhow, this is the 2/3 point, and it's so he's got this sort of lowest note, right? This is the first time we've come to the low G. Well, it's not the first time. I hit it briefly at the end of the first phrase, but this is the first time he sits down there, and so it gives it a fullness that we haven't had. So he's shaped this piece really well, and like things like little details like the fact that the melody here was E. And his left-hand arpeggio skips the E because we don't need it. He wanted to keep the depth of the low C, and he didn't want to just arpeggiate that. Like I did, just arpeggiated. Right? I did just that. I just arpeggiated the C triad up here. But since he had the lower C here, rather than just arpeggiate the C, he was like, no, I can stretch it out more. I don't need the E because it's in the melody. That's thinking. That's good. That is good writing there. It's small on my screen. And he kept that little change of direction thing I had. And then this passage is exactly what I wrote. which ties it back together. It's like a little, this whole last phrase you could call a recapitulation. He's accompanied it slightly differently for the first couple bars, but for the last 2 bars, he's gone almost back to my original. But nope, he changed one little subtle thing here, which is great. My original part was... Oh, I'm singing the wrong line. And what he changed it to is bottom. So he came down to a D where I went up to a G. To be honest, I have no idea why I didn't do that. I might have talked about it in the lesson. I might have talked about this because this seems like a logical thing to try to do, just walk down like that. And I might have done it and then rejected it for some reason. I might have, and either rejected it or said, maybe I'll use it later, and then left it open. To be honest, I don't remember how I set up the lesson, but this is absolutely a valid choice to say, hey, instead of doing this, instead, because that requires a leap down, his version, this is a more linear version. So this is more, contrapuntal. This is more the way Bach would have done it, and is more the way Mozart would have done it. And I'm totally oversimplifying it when I say that, but the chordal accompaniment figures that are basically chordal is something you're going to associate more with classical era. Accompaniment figures that are more linear, you're going to associate more with the Baroque. So Stephen, you got an alternative here. I want to take a look at it because you just posted it, and unfortunately I don't see it in my fancy pinned version of the chat, so I need to come back to... Wait a minute, where is the thing? I hate when I do that. I can't find the original. Here we go. So let me close this. Oh, yeah, so... that's lovely. That is nice, too. Now, this... So what was originally... was the original, right? Let me flip back over here. The original was... So this version here is good for the original part because the piece isn't over yet, right? And so I don't want to stop the motion. I wanted to keep the motion going, but maybe put a comma at the end of that 4th bar. Not a full stop period, but kind of a comma, and that's what that period is doing for me. It's kind of, what that quarter note is doing for me. It's basically like a it's a little, slight breath before the next phrase. But it, I didn't need to keep the motion going all the way through there at the end of the piece. And so this is Patrick's version, and he used the same thing. And it's fine to do that. Your version, though, is a little maybe being explicitly aware that we're at the end of the piece. So instead of going on the last note, it just ends on the last note. And yeah, that's really nice. Now, I will say I do like the fact that the original had the E in it, because that completes the triad. Your version here just has the root doubled here, and I do like the E in there, so I probably would keep that. And then the next question, though, is, do I miss, because the original version eventually got that F sharp in there, the 3rd of that D chord. Stephen, your version doesn't have the 3rd of that A chord. It just has the root and 5th. And so coming off of an A and an a root and a root, and then going to this, it's like I've kind of, and then the last chord also, there's basically no 3rds in this entire measure after that first C here. That's the 3rd of the A minor chord. But after that, there's basically no 3rds. At the final cadence, that's where you might expect that. The final cadence, the very first chord of a piece, very last measure of a piece, in a 2-voice piece like this is times when you might decide to say forego a 3rd so that you can get the strength of root position chords. But that would be my only hesitation here. Would there be a way to make both? Like... I don't like that better. I like yours better, actually. But in any case, yeah, that totally works, and that would just be my only thing that I would play with. Is there a way to somehow get some more 3rd action happening? All right. So I had fun today. Hope you all did too, and maybe learned a thing or two along the way. And yeah, if you haven't already checked out the workshop and the the project, I should say, the musicianship project, where I give you that lead sheet and ask you to work on the thirds and sevenths and give you some advice on how to do that, definitely recommend it. It's great practice, because then next week I'm going to give you more stuff. Maybe I'll wait a couple weeks, but I will give you another thing to build on that foundation. So, this has been Music Masterclass, and this is what we do. Talk about making music, talk about some theory, talk about some practicality of doing things, hand position and things like that plays into it as well. So, yeah, just come back for more. So next week will be the third week of the month, at least for Wednesday and for Thursday. But on Wednesday, that means we'll be doing Score of the Month, and we'll be using the notation project. So I also gave a notation project to work on this week, and that notation project involves a particular choral score that I would love to see people enter, so we can talk about what issues came up entering it. All right? So hope everyone has had a good time here, and thanks everyone. And I didn't even see that typo there, but yes, of course, end to end. You did end on G there. Oh, there's your new version. Yeah, that totally works. That works too. I like that one, Stephen. Oh, beautiful. Winner. That's the winner. Beautiful. Okay, thanks everyone, and see you all next time.